I have named the pitcher plants Lil Jugs, Big Naturals, and Juicy Caboose. I'd like to see them dangling, those carnal cups both pendulous and gaping, sunbeamed so the veins bulge in their throats. The pitchers drool when they're happy, oozing sugar syrup from their pores, to which I say, girl, same. I am no longer at war with the ants that rally the colony's regiments up my bookshelf directly into the puckers of Juicy Caboose's rigid lips. She reddens, ridged with her pleasures, her glut betrayed by the dim shadows of still twitching bodies collected in the morgue sack. Macabre, but houseplants will make this neglected investment property a home. I keep my apartment humid, claustrophobic air obliterating all distinction between inward and outward breath. My love language is acts of service. I water the sphagnum moss at the roots and catch the plant's more complex nourishment. I learn to move without stirring the unventilated atmosphere to catch flies against the windows, pressing pale gold guts into mildew-gilded rivulets of condensation. As the pitchers grow engorged with vitamins, I seek out larger prey. Lure mice from their nests between the studs, then trap the merry rats that flit in the bowels of the communal rubbish skip. The body corporate holds a special general meeting to account for the disappearances of residents' cats. I perch beside the complimentary refreshments, conditioned air rasping on my skin, my absent landlord's vote in affirmation to install cameras at the building's entrances. No matter. I only need to keep the pitchers fed until his next inspection, when he will learn head first how to add value at last, if only as fertilizer. If the pitchers are not yet large enough, I have looked up where to saw the joints.
That was Nepenthe's Terrarium by Rebecca Hawkes, read by our guest today, Grace Shelley. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Grace Shelley is the editor of Overcom magazine, which is a queer literary journal made here in Tāmaki Makaurau. Welcome.
Thanks.
It's really nice to have you. We've known each other for quite some time, actually.
Yeah.
But we've not been particularly close.
No.
Yeah, we met at Teachers College, right?
Yeah, but I think that we weren't in kind of like the same friend group circles for that year.
Yeah.
Obviously, we like knew of each other and then kind of lost touch as we started off teaching out in the world.
Yeah, teaching does that a little
Yeah.
bit. When did you start Overcom magazine?
I started in around April of 2019. So it's just over 3 years that it's been going now.
Is it the first zine publication thing that you've made? Did you jump straight into that?
Yeah, kind of to the point where, like, when I first started, I wasn't in the zine scene at all when I first started it, whereas, like, from doing Overcom and trying to, like, get it out there, I've done a lot of zine fests over the last 3 years. I feel very much part of the zine fest scene at this point. But when I first started it, I didn't even realize that it was a zine that I had made, even though, like, now I get it professionally printed, but back then it was all, just photocopied on the work computers and photocopied on the work photocopiers and
Shout out Ministry of Education.
yeah. No, I paid.
Okay, yeah, true, okay, yeah.
And like everything was like folded by hand. And actually I had like a really bizarre thought last night when I opened up the box of like the latest issue of Overcom that I just picked up from the printers yesterday. And one of the things that I do, there's like a little peek behind the curtain, that they're not quite like flat enough when I get them from the printers. Like the fold where the staple is kind of like a little bouncy, and I want it to be like completely flat. So I squish it under books overnight to like get that really, like, so it's not rounded. And as I was doing it last night, I was thinking, like, there are hundreds of copies of Overcommunicate out there, and I have touched every single one of them. And it was kind of just like this bizarre thought.
It's beautiful, though, if you think about it.
Yeah. But yeah, as I was saying, when I first started it, I didn't kind of like realize that it was a zine until like a couple of weeks before Auckland Zine Fest, and I saw it pop up somewhere, and I was like, oh, shit, Overcom is a zine. I should go to Zine Fest. And that's been like a really big part of getting it out there and getting people to know what it is. And
So do you want to give us a little bit more information about what it is exactly then?
Yeah. So the tagline that I use is a literary journal featuring work by queer writers and artists. So I publish it twice a year, an issue in February, an issue in August, and every issue has a range of poems, short stories, artworks, different kinds of artworks, all by queer people. For the first, so the one that is just coming out, the one that I just picked up from the printer yesterday is issue 8. For the first 7 issues, the tagline was slightly different. It was kind of more gendered. So it was for queer women and non-binary people and gender diverse people. But because when I first started it, that was kind of the segment of the community that I was aware of. When I first started it, I had like just come out 6 months before that, and I was still really searching for where I fit into the queer community, which my understanding of at that time was still very based on like what's out there in media, which is largely focused on cis men. A lot of things that we know, like stereotypes that we know about gay people, are stereotypes about cis men. And I was trying to kind of like carve out where I fit in that community as a cis woman, and then the people that I was starting to become friends with and associate with who were largely cis women and non-binary people, and how to kind of like get a part of the community that stood like separate from what was predominant in media as I saw it at that time. But because I've been kind of like very much steeped in the queer community for the last 3 or 4 years, I no longer have that feeling like I need to break away from cis men, because like why bother segment the community? Like how does that really help anybody to segment the community? And it feels, since I changed it to just queer people, it feels so much better. It feels so much more open. I feel much better kind of like talking about it and introducing it to everybody. So I'm really glad that I made the shift. And when I announced it, like people were very on board with it, and so nobody's had to complain about shifting it, which is really good.
A thought on that is that I guess it also opens up the door for folks who potentially identify as cis men but are questioning or exploring their gender as well, where they might feel like, oh man, like I really need a space, but like I'm a cis man and I feel like that's not for me.
Yeah.
Whereas, like really it is a space for them.
Yeah.
To like explore and question and yeah.
So I certainly feel much better about it as like making a space that's just for everybody.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where like you want to make a space that's as open as possible, but also doesn't force people to identify themselves or like marry themselves to a particular identity or whatever. For example, in the contributor bios, I always say, put your pronouns in if you want to, because for some people, like choosing a set of pronouns is not a particularly comfortable thing to do. So yeah,
and potentially also outing themselves to people by telling them their pronouns. Not everybody uses the same pronouns as everybody else.
Yeah.
I'm curious though. I imagine that you know most of your contributors to some degree. Like, how many of your contributors are completely new to you, like people that you've never met or encountered before?
I mean, I can do a count. In the latest issue, we've got 17 contributors, and the people that I personally know is 1, 2, so 3. 3 people that I knew before that, and then there's a few contributors who have contributed a few times, and I've kind of gotten to know them a little bit more because of that.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah, so it's more and more like people who aren't my friends. I mean, from the very first issue, there's been people that I didn't know, strangers who've submitted. But yeah, there's still like a smattering of friends in there. I have to kind of like assure them that there's no like nepotism in choosing them to be in it, because it is, I try and be, as neutral as possible, considering the fact that, they are my friends, so I can't be completely neutral. It's impossible.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to be afraid to say no to a pal if there is something else that's come in that is, potentially going to fit the issue a bit better.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the reasons why I asked that was also because I'm curious if the demographic of contributors has changed through the change in the description of the publication.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell because I don't ask people to say, what part of the community they are. So I've always had people in the issue who use, like in different issues, who use he, him pronouns. And I've never, turned around and said, hey, you're not allowed to be here if you're using he, him pronouns. Like I would never, ever do that.
Yeah.
So, we've got a couple of people using he, him pronouns in this one. But yeah, I mean, one thing that I did notice is that the number of submissions went up significantly this issue. Yeah. So the previous issue 7, it was about 35 submissions, and in this one I had 57 submissions.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So
That's awesome.
that feels very cool, and I love that more people are hearing about it, and more people are seeing it as a place that they can get their work published, but which exists in a very queer space. I think I have a lot of people submitting, and it's their first time submitting their writing anywhere. And I don't know how much this is part of it, but I certainly hope that part of what makes them feel comfortable to submit is that it is a queer space. So there's already like a moment of connection with the lit journal, and something that maybe makes them feel a little bit more like it's theirs and like they can submit. And there's great stuff that comes in from first timers. I tend not to read the bios until I've chosen the pieces, and then I go back and I'm like, oh, this is their first time submitting. That's awesome.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. It takes an incredible amount of vulnerability to submit something to any kind of publication. Yeah. Really. Partially just because of the fear of rejection, but also because like sharing your work, like especially poetry, but any kind of artistic work with anyone is just like really quite soul bearing.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I find really interesting about poetry, that we make assumptions about poetry that we don't necessarily make about other kinds of, like prose. You make an assumption about poetry that the speaker is the author. Like it's you really assume that that's like, a one-to-one thing, that they're not putting on the persona of somebody else. And I don't think we make the same assumptions about prose, particularly if it's prose written in third person. But for example, the book that I read the poem from at the beginning, there's a few poems in there that are written in third person, but I've just always assumed that they're, about Rebecca Hawkes, the poet. There was something really interesting about that recently. I don't know if you saw what was going around on Instagram, really led by Lily Holloway, who's a poet who's living in Wellington now, was in Auckland.
I own one of their coats.
Oh.
Yes. They wanted to give it to me for free, but it's so beautiful. I gave them some money for it. It's just the best coat I've ever owned.
Oh, amazing. So they were like spearheading this kind of like letter that went out in response to a review that was written about the poet SMA Ranapiri's new book, Echidna. Yeah. And the SMA Ranapiri is a queer person who uses they, them pronouns. And the reviewer just blatantly refused to use those pronouns and kind of like ridiculed Ranapiri's identity throughout, and it was just one of the most like bizarre things to read. But weirdly, one of the more things that I found more bizarre about it was a passage in which the reviewer talked about, like, he picked out 3 of the poems and said, like, this one and this one are, it's really interesting that Ranapiri, how did he phrase it, like, obviously is talking about themselves in these poems, which I found like a weird thing to say, because like, is that not the assumption that we always make?
Yeah.
But then he carried on to say, like, there was another poem that was about sex, and he was like, well, obviously this one is not about the poet's personal experience, which is a very bizarre and weird assumption to make, that that as if like gender non-conforming people don't fuck. Can I swear?
Yeah, absolutely, you can swear. I find that hilarious as well. Just like, have you read any queer poetry in Auckland?
Like, queer poetry is all about
fucking.
fucking. Like,
yeah, 100%. That's that's really interesting. And where that reviewer chose to draw the line between what was personal from the poet and what wasn't. It's interesting that you mention, unless there was something else you wanted to say about that review, because that's a whole kettle of fish.
Yeah, I think that's as much of the kettle of fish as I want to open.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that queer poets talk a lot about sex, because I've had quite a few conversations with Dan Goodwin. Do you know Dan Goodwin?
I don't.
I'm just going to shout out Dan Goodwin here, just for fun, about this, because, a lot of queer poetry, I mean, most of the queer poetry that I consume is from Aotearoa, but so much of it is about sex, which I love. I love reading poetry about sex and romance and love. I mean, that's largely what I write as well. But why do you think that is? Do you have, or is that your experience? Do you have a different experience? Because you get to see such a broad spectrum of poetry in your role.
Yeah, I do. I get to read so much and a huge variety. A lot of what comes in, I would say that predominantly, kind of like the theme of stuff that comes in, a lot of it is explicitly about being queer. I think that is kind of the most like the most prominent topic of poems that come in, which is really cool. Like, people's experiences of coming out, people's experiences of dysmorphia, and all those kinds of things. I would say I get less in that is explicit. It's kind of like there's a lot of stuff that feels like underneath the surface it's about sex. There's a lot of metaphors about sex. A lot of writing in that way about sex. I mean, a few years ago I did a special issue of Overcom. I did 2 special issues, one called Love Poems and one called Sex Poems. And
I have these ones at home.
Oh,
yes.
Excellent. And I mean, I don't know if you've noticed that all of the sex poems are metaphorical.
Yep.
There is no words describing any body part, any like genitalia exist.
Yeah.
At like anywhere in there. And I think that is something, when I got all the poems in and I looked through and I realized that, I was like, man, I was so prepared to publish something really explicit. So I found that really interesting. I mean, I love that collection. Sex Poems is, I mean, I like them both, Love Poems and Sex Poems. They're great. But yeah, I am kind of in the longer term. I've got like a few Overcom projects that are kind of like simmering in the background at the moment that I'm working on.
Can we know about any of them?
I can talk about those. So one of them is a couple of new collections like Love Poems and Sex Poems, which were special poetry editions. So all of the other issues have a mix of poetry, prose and art. But I want to do a couple of other like special poetry editions, and I haven't 100% decided what they're going to be, but I am like 70% sure that that the two are going to be called Fucking and Fighting.
Great.
And I'm hoping that what I publish in Fucking is like explicit, like 18 plus sex poems.
Right.
Like at Auckland Zen Fest last weekend, one of my students who's a year 10 came by and bought a copy of sex poems, and I was fine to sell it to them.
Yeah.
But I want to publish something that if a year 10 tried to buy it, I would not let them buy it.
Yeah. Get little biodegradable plastic seals for them. It's the sealed section.
Yeah. Like go back to girlfriend vibes. One of the other projects that I'm working on that I'm really excited about getting started on in a couple of months is I'm very pleased and honoured to have got some funding from the Mātātuhi Foundation, which funds literary projects through Auckland Writers Festival. And yeah, I'm really, really chuffed about it. I will be able to pay some poets for the first time. I've never ever had enough money to pay any contributors and like bless them that people continue to contribute just for the joy of having stuff published. But I'm really excited to give some people some money. And I'll be publishing, it's a digital only edition, which will be publishing poetry in relation to days that are important in the queer calendar. So a poem for Bisexuality Day, and a poem for Lesbian Day, and a poem for the anniversary of the Marriage Amendment Act and that kind of thing. So I'm going to be launching that in a couple of months. But I'm starting to get the word out there because I want people to start thinking about it and start thinking if they want to submit some stuff and get some money. I mean, it's $75 per contributor, so it's not like a life-changing amount, but I think that's more than you would usually get paid for a poem. So, yeah.
I mean, a lot of poets don't get paid anything at all. So yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, it's a cool opportunity, and I think it's a really cool project idea as well. Something that's a little bit of a sidestep, but something I kind of want to talk about, because you are editor of Overcommunicate, you are poet, you are teacher, and I'm curious, because you mentioned your year 10, how your experience as a teacher sort of fed into also like the kaupapa behind this work. Because you said that like part of making the zine was like carving out your own space, but at the same time you talk a lot about Overcommunicate as a sort of service to the queer community as well. And I don't know, I feel like there's something teachery tied into that.
Yeah, I mean, they have kind of run parallel to each other without necessarily meeting too much. I think I read a lot of writing as an English teacher. You know, I read thousands and thousands of words of student writing every week. And, you know, you read a lot of writing from people who don't particularly care about writing. And it kind of reminds me every time I read something that comes in for Overcom, like these are people who care about writing and want to get their writing out there.
It's a chance for you to engage with that as well. It's like a little treat.
And I think it's been really cool that in the past I've had a few students who've submitted work as well. So that's kind of a rad, like extra kind of connection there.
Do you get many young people? Like when I say young people, I'm talking like under 18 submitting?
People don't often put their ages in the bios that I get in, but sometimes they'll mention that they're a student. And yeah, I do get a fair amount of stuff from young people. And it's kind of weird. You know, obviously with my students, I'm Ms. Shelley and, you know, I'm relatively formal. And it's weird, you know, sending something to somebody who I know is quite young and being like, at the end of the email, "Ngā mihi, Grace." But yeah, it's, you know, it's a real delight to read work from young people or see art from young people who are, you know, on their journeys with writing and creating
and what about your life as a poet? Because I mean, like, yeah, I know you're a poet. I asked you the other day that if you're a poet, and I was like, of course you're a poet. Like, I've read your poetry before. But I feel like that's, I don't know, I think potentially a side of you which you maybe advertise less, maybe because you want to be seen as holding space rather than taking it up. I don't know, that's my perception.
I certainly feel there are 2 times in Overcom's history I have published myself. One of them was in sex poems because it was a project for previous contributors, and I thought, it's not like I'm collecting in submissions and taking up a space. This is like a special extra project, so I can chuck my work in there. And the other one was, unfortunately, somebody pulled out at the very last minute of an issue, and it kind of wasn't enough time to like scramble and get something else to put in there, so I chucked one of my own things in there, which was very lockdown vibes. It was in it was in last year's longer lockdown, and I kind of just wrote this like I don't know how to describe it. It's like a love poem that's both very intense and very mild at the same time. It's about like love being something that just like exists in a moment and then may or may not stay, but you can still call it love even if it only like exists for a tiny bit of time.
Very nice.
But yeah, I think that like the longer that I do this and the more that I think about my own writing, the more that I realize how like crap I was at writing in the past.
I don't believe that for a second, but
I mean, I think that like I feel like now I am just hitting my upward swing, and I hope that I'm kind of getting better. A lot of that is down to the fact that I'm writing more now than I ever used to. And like when I was young, when I was a teenager and I was like young and depressed and had a lot of thoughts and not very many friends to talk about those thoughts with, I wrote a lot of poetry. And then got my teachers to read it so that I could like submit it to competitions and stuff. But once I kind of like hit uni, I stopped writing, and particularly once I got to teachers college, and then from that point onwards I really hadn't been writing at all, because teaching English is very writing heavy anyway, and what I'm writing day to day is feedback on students' work, which takes brain power, but I'm also writing examples of things. I want students to know what a metaphor is. I've got to write a metaphor, and you're just like banging stuff like that out all the time, and I had no space for my own creativity. Even when I started Overcom, I didn't kind of think about myself as a writer, and I'd had a lot of angst about not really feeling like a writer anymore. It's really interesting that like I don't know if you've experienced this, but like whatever your family narrative about you is becomes a burden at a certain point. So the family narrative about me was that I was the creative one, I was the writer, because I wrote so much when I was growing up. And then the more that the longer that it had been since I had written anything, it just felt like more and more of a burden. Actually, my older sister is a music therapist, and she was interviewed about that on a radio show, and somehow the topic of writing came up in that, and she said, I'm not really a writer, you'd have to go to my sister for that. And I was like, it's so beautiful that she said that, but I felt like such a fraud because I wasn't writing anything at that point. And I think that what got me writing again was reading more poetry, and not just stuff that I was reading for Overcom, but there have been so many good poetry books published in Aotearoa in the last year, like just a ton of like just truly incredible stuff that has come out. And then going back also to some stuff that's a little bit older, but like, still within the last, 10 years or so. And reading so much of that stuff that's being published right now, it just makes me like so excited to write. And then the other thing was that I run the school poetry club, which is a group of like each week 2 to 6 students who come along and we write, and I write at the same time as them, and that got me writing as well. So it's been really exciting to get back into writing myself and back into like submitting stuff. And, I'm not getting published a ton, but it's still like really exciting to be putting stuff out there. Yeah.
That's really nice to hear. And it's so cool with your poetry club.
Yeah.
Do they just write for writing's sake, or do they perform as well?
No, it's not performance. It's just on the page.
That's cool.
I think it's really interesting that you ask that question, because I think it kind of speaks to the different like sides of poetry that we're into. I think that you like the poetry space that you live in is a lot of performance poetry, and I'm very much not in the performance poetry world. Like if I was to read a poem out, I would never think of myself as performing a poem. I'm just like reading it out, and I very much deal with stuff like on the page. And it's very cool that these like two quite different but still related things are like two like very big scenes, I guess.
I feel like there is a meeting of worlds in a lot of ways. I think like quite a lot of the published poets, like more recent published poets, like I'm thinking of some in my head, and quite a few of the ones that I'm thinking of are performance poets as well. But yeah, I mean they are still two worlds, and I think that's something that comes up a lot in discussions around poetry, is this like idea of like the conflict between the two worlds.
I don't see it as a conflict at all. But I think that a written poem read aloud and a poem that's designed to be read aloud written down, there's something that feels like that it's not its intention.
Yeah.
Like reading that Rebecca Hawkes poem out at the beginning, you miss where the line breaks are and how long the lines are, and that's really fascinating. When you're reading poetry. So,
yeah. Purpose and audience. It's a little inside joke for our English teacher friends. But yeah, I was reading Muhammad Hassan's national anthem again today, because I don't even know why I picked it up again, but I was just having a look at it again, and it's interesting because a lot of the poems in there, the first time I was exposed to them was through performance. And Muhammad's like such a captivating performer. And that's sort of like how they lived in my head. And then I remember when I first read them on the page, and I was like, whoa, this is such a different experience, because he plays with punctuation, plays with placement on the page, and also like often has Arabic script in the book, but then sometimes also an English translation, whereas when he performs it, he'd just say the words in Arabic, and it's just it's a completely different experience of the poem.
I mean, obviously I'd heard of his poetry book, but I didn't realize that he was a performance poet until I listened to the like first episode of this, and his name came up, and I was like, I haven't read that collection. To be honest, I read the first page, and I was like, I'm not sure if this is like, I couldn't kind of get into it, but I'm like, I need to give everything a second shot.
I can send you some YouTube videos and also give you the book, because it's a whole thing. It's a whole package. I'm curious, when you said, there are some really cool poetry books being published in Aotearoa right now, what you were referring to.
It's like I've got my little pile of stuff that I haven't read yet that I'm very excited to read. So the stuff that's come out recently, there was AUP New Poets 8, which is, I think, published yearly by Auckland University Press, and 3 poets in every issue. And in New Poets 8 was Lily Holloway. Their work is incredible. Obviously, this collection by Rebecca Hawkes called Meat Lovers, which I could just rave about forever. Rebecca Hawkes grew up on a farm, and that is like integral to so much of her poetry. And I'm a vegetarian, and there is so much about meat and death and offal, and it's just, yeah, it's incredible. Like the
Ironically, you love that.
I mean, I don't. I hate it, but I think that's why I love it so much. I knew that I was getting myself into something I wasn't prepared for when on the first page is about meat and buying meat at the supermarket and like buying a tray of meat and it having a nipple on it. And I was like, wow, okay, I'm really in for something here.
And there's some quite meaty things happening on the cover as well.
Yeah, it's very like pink and fleshy, the illustration on the cover. I also read Hera Lindsay Bird by Hera Lindsay Bird for the first time like late last year. Which is crazy. You know, that book came out in 2016 and made huge waves when it came out, and I just, you know, never got on that vibe, but I'm on it now. Hina Baker's relatively new collection, Funk House, which is like very, very cool. I love poetry that when I read it, I'm like, I've got absolutely no clue what this is about, but the language is so beautiful.
Love that.
And the way that Hina Baker's poetry just like traverses topics, like the poems never end where they began, and that's very cool. And then I've got a couple that's on my to read pile that I'm really looking forward to reading. So Echidna by Esa May Ranapiri and I'm a Human Being by Jay. I don't know how to say her last name. Newland? Yeah.
Shout out to Jay.
Yeah. Who I don't know personally, but have, like, you know, am certainly aware of as a person in poetry in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been reading. There's more. I'm gonna like leave this and kick myself for not mentioning like this thing or that thing or whatever.
I think it's good to have sort of like a small handful, because realistically, folks listening at home will probably remember like one name.
Yeah.
But I think it's so incredible, and I guess this is one of the reasons why the podcast exists, that like you and I as poets and literary enthusiasts, we know about like all the stuff that is happening, and like, yeah, like you, I feel like the poetry scene is booming.
Yeah.
But if you speak to someone who isn't into poetry, like not a single poet, they wouldn't be able to name a single poet.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's so unique to, I feel it's quite unique to poetry, because like I feel like most people would be able to name a New Zealand author, or like even if they're not into New Zealand music, they'd be able to be like, I know 660 or whatever, you know. But there's not really like there's no 660 of poetry, you know.
But I'm hopeful that I mean, like, you know, people that are being published now, if we as English teachers teach them now, then that's what gets it out there. I mean, there's some stuff that's being published that's just so funny and so good, and I think about like me and my two kind of like closest work buds. The three of us this year I did a unit of work with year 11s on Hera Lindsay Bird poems. My colleague Jordan Tricklebank did, who's like,
shout out Jordan,
huge shout out to Jordan. I actually should do like a very big shout out to Jordan. He is, I had to describe him recently in a funding application because I put him down as a reference, and I put co-mentor. I think that was the best thing that I could come up with, because he has a literary project that he works on as well. I have Overcom also, and it is so good to have somebody else that I run stuff past. I like, oh my God, the number of messages that I send to him. And while I'm doing this shout, I also want to shout out Kat Atkinson. So, and Ollie Sykes. So, okay, Jordan Tricklebank, Kat Atkinson, Ollie Sykes are the three, like, MVPs of Overcom because I run so much past them. Like, oh my God, it's crazy. But anyway, I'll get back to the original thing that I was saying, which is that like Jordan's done a unit of work on Te Tibble poetry, and our friend Vinny Bowden has done a unit of work on Rebecca Hawke's poetry.
Great.
And is currently teaching Ashley Young's essay collection, Can You Tolerate This? And it's like, yeah, in my English department then there's at least 3, probably more, groups of classes who are getting stuff that they've never come across before. I mean, Jordan and Vinny have both taught poems this year with the word pussy in it. And it's like, it's very cool. You know, one of our other colleagues, her son is in Vinny's class, and apparently he like rushed home after studying, after they looked at While You Were Partying, I Studied the Blade by Rebecca Hawkes, and he rushed home and said, oh, Mum, you have to read this poem, which is crazy for like, you know, students to be rushing home and telling their parents that they have to read this poem because it's just so funny and so good. Yeah, it's sorry that I interrupted that with my shout outs.
No, please. Always room for shout outs. I think it's interesting that you say that, like, you know, English teachers have a role to get the poetry out there, because one of the things I think about when I think about the fact that poetry doesn't have as much of like a cultural footing in the mainstream in New Zealand is that people quite often only have an exposure to poetry in high school.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you sort of like note the importance of that.
And the poetry that you're exposed to in high school is not necessarily the most interesting stuff that's out there. I think that there is, I mean, teachers are extremely busy people, and it is easier to teach stuff that has a body of teaching resources behind it, which is often older, often traditional, often British or American.
Yeah.
And not that often New Zealand stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so much harder for us to take on something that is brand new and has no teaching resources behind it. You have to make everything from scratch. So it's certainly not something, you know, I would never go around saying English teachers have to be teaching this new stuff because, God, I barely have the energy.
Yeah.
You know, I had the energy this year to teach like 2 new things.
Yeah.
2 new texts kind of thing, and that's it.
Yeah. But I mean, like, obviously outside of education, the main way that I was exposed to poetry as an adult, because I didn't actually study English, I studied media studies and communications. The main way that I was exposed to poetry as an adult was through performance poetry. But obviously things like zines and journals are another way to do that. So, I mean, you said you're going to be making some online only content. How else do most people access Overcom?
It's, I mean, up until this new project that I'll be working on, it's just a print thing. It's like it just exists in print. And I have published like excerpts of stuff, you know, to kind of like entice people to buy it. But yeah, other than that, it just exists as a real thing. So people come across it. So the 2 kind of like biggest ways, one of them is through Instagram, which is a real beast that I, you know.
I'm not going to shout out Instagram.
No, don't shout out Instagram. I you know, I got into making Overcom because I like words, and I never thought that what I was getting myself in for was being the editor, which is the part that I like and enjoy, and also a graphic designer, a social media marketer, and an accountant. Those are the parts that are, you know, more of a challenge for me. But yeah, I mean, Instagram is a really big way that people come across Overcom. And then also at Zine Fests and markets. I'm always thinking about other ways to get it out there, but I am not a marketing person. And I think one of the things that I would really, really like is to get it into bookshops. And I'm pretty sure that Unity in Wellington is going to be stocking some copies in the next little while, which is very exciting. But yeah, I think that I want it to be in more places where people can just encounter it. Obviously, you know, that would be much easier if it was free and I could just leave it a bunch of places. But unfortunately, I have to keep it ticking over. I mean, it's cheap. I try and keep it like as cheap as possible. I make no money out of. There's no profit anywhere. Everything is just poured back into it and keeps the copies as cheap as possible. I also do want to say that the very first issue was free. I just kind of like spent the money. I was like, this is a brand new thing. I don't know if anybody's going to want it. So I just made it completely free and I just kind of like paid for everything myself. And then I didn't love the idea of charging, but I was also like, okay, issue 1 cost me, you know, $500-ish. I've never counted it up because I don't really want to, but you know, a little bit of my own money, and I couldn't keep doing that as much as I'd want to. But if there's anybody who finds it inaccessible to buy a copy, they can fill out a form on the website and I'll just send them a copy free. So it was very cool that in the last call for submissions, obviously a few more people caught on to that, and I got a lot more requests for it, which is really great. I love it that people are requesting it, and yeah, I like that there is the scope for, you know, everybody having access to it, even if money is a barrier.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing, people being able to just go onto the website and get a free issue.
Yeah, and no questions asked. You know, you don't have to say why you need it.
Yeah. I'm going to give you some ideas about where you could put it later on.
Oh my God,
we can
please
talk
do.
about it afterwards. I just don't want to get people like really excited and have them like rush out to go get it if it doesn't happen. But
can I do another shout out?
Yes, please.
To Gray's, which is a new space that's opening on Dominion Road. It's going to be a coffee bar. They're trying to get it into a wine bar and a little shop as well, and they were going to be opening this week, but the owner got COVID, so they're opening once he doesn't have COVID anymore, and it will be there as well, along with Rat World, which is another really exciting
shout out Rat World.
Yeah, it's very cool that there's lots of little journals like this popping up. Like, if people who are listening want to know, you know, other places that they can go, check out Rat World, which is brand new. They've just done their second issue and it's like really incredible. And the Agenda zine, which is another queer zine. So they're kind of working in a really similar space to what Overcom is doing, but the vibe of it is completely different. When you open it up, it looks very different. And also Eel Mag, which is also brand new. That's an online only, but also queer. I mean, how great is it that like in Aotearoa we've now got 3, unless I'm forgetting somebody, like specifically queer literary journals. Like, that's really exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's really exciting. And I think that's the thing. I want more normies to know about this, you know. I want it to be something for queer folk and, you know, people who often don't have access to those spaces, but also the audience to be wider and for it to grow. But also not to be reviewed by bigots.
Yeah, that's the ideal. That's the sweet spot.
I was going to ask you, because before we started recording, we talked about the name change, because I was referring to it as Overcommunicate magazine. But I can see the latest issue on the table, and it's called Overcom.
Yeah, it is. So that was that's been a very big change. That was one that I, you know, went out to all my pals and said, like, is this something that I should do? when I chose the name Overcommunicate, it was so there's a singer called Hayley Kiyoko.
Shout out Hayley Kiyoko.
The subtitle for this episode of your podcast should be the shout outs episode. So her nickname is the Lesbian Jesus, or just Lesbian Jesus, and she does a lot of like very explicitly queer like pop. And when I was first coming out, I was listening to a lot of Hayley Kiyoko. And the word overcommunicate is in the chorus of one of her songs. And I was like, that's very cool. And I went with that as the title of it. Had I thought that I was still going to be doing this, 3 years later, would I have chosen a name with 15 letters and 6 syllables? Probably not. So just for my own sanity, I didn't even notice that I was doing it until I'd done it. I call it Overcom most of the time whenever I'm talking to people, because if I had to say over communicate every time, I would lose my mind. And it just kind of felt like I'm calling it Overcom more and more. Over communicate is really a mouthful. And so I just kind of like pulled the trigger, and the latest issue has got Overcom on the front cover. I'm kind of considering like a transitional issue, because on the front it says Overcom, but when you open it up on the inside, on the contributors page, it says Overcommunicate. So it's kind of got both. And I'm unsure if I'm going to continue with both or switch it entirely to Overcom. People will keep calling it Overcommunicate or Overcom, and I think that's fine. I think that I wouldn't want to change it to a completely different name, because I think that would require a little bit too much like advertising to be like, hey, we're this thing now. Like it took people so long to stop calling it Telecom and start calling it Spark. It's one of the biggest companies in New Zealand. But it feels kind of scary to have something different on the cover, and I am a little bit worried that maybe people won't know that it's the same thing, but I'm hoping that everybody does.
The Instagram handle is
Overcom Mag.
Yeah.
So it has been shortened in there for a while.
I don't know. Personally, I would have definitely recognized it from being called Overcom. I wouldn't have been like, what are you talking about?
Okay.
I have
That's
no
good.
idea. it's similar enough.
And the feel of it is still the same, like the fonts are the same, and the layout is mostly the same, except for the title on the front. So, and it's still got the same like Māori subtitle, Te Maha o Ngā Kōrero, which is like I love as our subtitle. It means an abundance of conversation, which like kind of says the same idea, but it's really beautiful. And that's that's not going to be shortened, because that's like perfect as it is. So that stays.
Nice. Cool. So this transitional issue, the first issue with the new title on the cover, is the issue coming out this August.
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
So it'll be out probably on the 5th, unless something goes wrong.
Early August.
Early August.
Yeah.
It'll be out. Yeah. And since this is the shout outs episode, I want to do a really, really big shout out to the Rainbow New Zealand Charitable Trust. Obviously, when we have been in lockdowns over the last couple of years, and particularly last year at the release of the 6th issue, a bunch of stuff was cancelled, and I was really worried that I wasn't going to be able to afford to print the next issue. So I'm really chuffed that Rainbow New Zealand Charitable Trust, I applied for a grant and they gave me some money, and it was just the biggest relief to know that I wouldn't have to shut the whole thing down. So this issue is possible thanks to them. So
So are there any other folks that you want to give a particular shout out to now that we're here?
I think I've done all my shout outs, but I think that the people that I mentioned before, Jordan, Kat, and Ollie, have been there for me as the solo editor of this, to have people that I can bounce stuff off. And there have been a number of moments over the last 3 years that I have genuinely said I should just shut the whole thing down. I'm doing everything all wrong. Like, there's no point carrying on. And to have the people around me who are like, no, you're doing something good. You should carry on with this. And the people that I can go, hey, can you proofread this and make sure I don't have any typos?
They also man your stall at Zenfest.
Yeah, people who come and look after my stall at Zenfest so I can go and eat some lunch. It's all... Yeah, I am very grateful that I've got friends around me who help me with this. Yeah.
One-man band with a team of friends.
Yeah. Yeah, that's me.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's also a classic poet vibe as well. Lonely scribbler with a hype crew.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love that. Okay, well, would you like to share one of your own poems today as well?
I will.
Great. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the poem, or do you want to just dive straight in?
I think I'm just going to dive straight in. So it's called The Tulips Droop, Diana is the name. The tulips droop, Diana. They were yellow when you passed to me, their slim, gauze-wrapped bodies, and last night they burgeoned into burning orange, but now they list down the neck of the vase, Diana, reaching for the floor or death. The stems have rotted, Diana. I do not know how this happens, my friend. I pulled a bulb and it separated from its umbilical cord too easily, rotted sinew, furry mould coquetting behind a shoot. The leaves weep red on the underside, Diana. Oh, do not see this as portent of my maternity. I saved them, Diana. I cut them and put them back into water. Mutilated stalks, 4 pregnant knots. Will they open, Diana, though they are squat now? I cut off the mould and the blooded teardrops. I amputated them. They are fine now. This is fine.